Hi, this is Barbara Neal. I'm the owner of Money Talk, which is a financial education company based in Ocala, Florida, where I live. And I write, speak, and review content about personal finance. And I'm going to be talking to you today about a program that I did for older adults here in Florida called Beyond Legal Documents 12 Planning Strategies for a Good Ending. And it falls within the realm of estate planning. And it's really everything else except what you might hear from an attorney, because obviously I'm not an attorney, I'm a CFP and an AFC. But it's all the things that people can do to make the end of their life just smoother for both themselves and also for their loved ones. So I'll be talking about the program that I developed. I'll share some of the content from the program and also some of the evaluation for the program at the end. So the objectives for the overall class, I had four, but we're really only going to do the last two today. But I did start the program here in Florida, which was a 90-minute program. I had more time by briefly defining and discussing what estate planning is, and then briefly discussing some of the key legal documents that people complete, like wills and living wills and the like. I'm not really going to get into that today because of the time constraint, but I'm going to go right to the second part of the program, which talked about what a good ending is to a person's life, and also some key strategies, 12 of them to be exact, that people could consider for the end of life planning beyond the legal documents that hopefully you all have in place with a legal advisor. So just a word that the slides that I uploaded for AFCPE are the slides for this presentation. However, if you'd like the full slide deck for the 90-minute presentation that I did for older adults here in Florida, you can go to my SlideShare account and it will be within the SlideShare account, and you can just download that for free. There's, no charge or anything. So that way you'll have the whole slide deck, or you can get in touch with me if you're interested in pursuing that further. Okay, so how I started the program and how I'll start the webinar today is to ask you to answer this question. Now, obviously, we're doing a virtual presentation, so we don't have the ability to discuss it face to face. But what do you think is a good ending to a person's life? So you might be thinking about your own life, or you might be thinking about a family member or friends who have passed away recently. And perhaps some of them had a very smooth, peaceful ending to their life, and perhaps others, it was just full of confusion and drama and not a whole lot of peace. So I'll give you a second or two to think about that. And that's kind of how I started the program when I was teaching it face to face here in Florida. And then we kind of debriefed and we took comments from people in the class. And then I used this summary slide to kind of hit on some highlights as well. So some of the definitions of a good ending, and this comes from my book, Flipping a Switch. And the last transition, I use flipping a switch as kind of a metaphor for a transition in later life. And the last one in the book, chapter 35, has to do with planning a good ending. So we kind of define in the book what is a good ending. Many people would say dying in peace. The so-called Niagara Falls trajectory, where your health is really, really good for most of your later life, and then, a very short period of decline before somebody passes away. Most people would much rather have that than an extended period of time where they're kind of in a health decline, perhaps in a care facility. So that's another good ending. Burying hatchets if needed. Some people are estranged from others, and experts in this whole area of having a good ending often talk about people getting together, burying the hatchets, communicating after many years, ending the estrangements, that sort of thing. Having advance directives is so important. So things that um, can be done by a surrogate, like somebody who holds the power of attorney or somebody who can make healthcare decisions for you in later life. Sharing important data, and I'm going to mention that several times today throughout the presentation so that people can find key documents and make decisions. Having less confusion when you pass away, and having trusted surrogates that you can depend on, whether it's the executor to your will, guardian for your children, trustees, and other positions. And then another good part of a good ending is just sharing your preferences with others, because people can't really act on your behalf in the most capable way if they don't know what you prefer and what your underlying decisions are. So all of these things are part of having a good ending to your life and tying up loose ends, as it kind of shows on the slide here. So I'm going to get into these 12 different planning strategies. And before I do, just note that some of these are interrelated. For example, I'll be mentioning a letter of last instruction, and I'll also be mentioning what attorneys refer to as a separate writing list, where you make a list of untitled property and who's going to get what. Very often these two are combined because you will be referring to the separate writing list in your letter of last instruction. And similarly, communicating with heirs, very often you'll have written information that you'll want to share with them. And I'll be talking about preparing a financial notebook and the importance of getting that notebook, its location and its contents in the hands of people who will be handling your estate, which is typically a close family member or a friend. So we'll get into each of these strategies and talk about how they work. So the first one is simplification and downsizing. So many people do have what might be called asset sprawl. We have a lot of stuff, if you want to put it in a 5-letter word. And the thing to remember about stuff, whether it's physical possessions or financial assets and accounts, estate planning will always, always be easier when you have fewer items to manage or dispose of. So this speaks to the need for simplification and perhaps a desire for downsizing as people get older. So some of the action steps that people can take to simplify and downsize: selling, gifting, or donating unneeded possessions. So I hear people talking about that a lot down here in Florida, because a lot of people move things from another location in the country and have come to realize that those things that they moved, whether it's items of clothing or I don't know, different gear for snow, even in some cases, that's not going to happen around here. So just selling, gifting, or donating unneeded possessions. And many people will start with their family members and see if anybody within the family is interested in those possessions, and then maybe go to a thrift shop or a consignment shop or something like that, if there's still some things left over. Another thing to consolidate is similar financial accounts. So people may have several different IRAs with different employers, or different, 401ks or 403bs with employers, or IRAs with financial institutions. And you may want to just consolidate them. So instead of having 5 IRAs, maybe you have 1 or 2. This is going to make a required minimum distribution so much easier, as well as just simplify the paperwork and the statements and the accounts that you have. Also, consolidating investments at a single financial institution, and limiting new possessions and new financial assets. Because again, if the whole purpose is to be simplifying and having fewer accounts and fewer possessions, you don't want to keep buying some more. I've met several people down here in Florida who did a really good job of downsizing when they left their prior home, but they've also done a pretty good job of upsizing once they came here to Florida. So something to think about. Okay, the second one is to do a net worth calculation. And this is always a good idea at any age in life, just to have kind of a status check, if you will, or a snapshot of your finances. But it also becomes important to help with estate planning and end of life planning because people may need to have this information when you pass or if you're incapacitated, and it's really a good idea to have it all in one place. So as we all know, assets minus debts is your net worth, and it's a good idea to update your net worth calculation at least annually. Typically, you'll want to do it around the same time. Some people do it during tax season because they have lots of financial data readily available. I prefer to do it sometime during the summer months because I started doing that when I worked at Rutgers, and I used to take most of my vacation time during the summer. So it really kind of depends what your schedule is, but you want to do a status check periodically. And I know it's going to be difficult in 2022 because the stock market's been pretty rough. And if you've got any money in stocks or stock funds, either in taxable accounts and or in retirement savings accounts, you're probably going to see a reduced balance. And that's not going to be easy, but it is important that we do this annual status check and that we keep up to date with the value of our assets and the amount of our debts. So by doing this, not only do you have this information, but it is really important for the executor of your estate and perhaps the attorney that will be working with the executor, because the first steps in the probate process are to gather all the assets of the estate and then, of course, to pay all the debts of the estate. So none of the beneficiaries are going to get anything until the assets have all been identified, the debts have been paid. And rather than make people hunt around for this information, the beauty of a net worth statement is that everything is calculated on one sheet of paper. So this is why you want to have an up-to-date net worth calculation so that whoever needs to step in on your behalf will have that information and be able to get right down to business. And remember too, when you're dealing with attorneys, time is money. So if they've got to spend time trying to look for assets and debts that could have been easily identified in advance, that's going to cost some money to the estate. So get everything itemized. It's also a good idea when you do your net worth statement to make a notation next to the identified assets and debts as to whose they are. Are they individual property, owned by one person alone? Are they owned jointly by a couple? Is there any kind of POD or payable on death arrangement on that asset? That can just be noted with a footnote or just a couple words, and that too will make it easy to kind of understand the property that somebody owns. And then again, like I said, communication is key, so you'll want to share this information with your trusted loved ones and with your executor so the information is readily available. This is an example of a worksheet that you could use for net worth. We actually have two of them on the Rutgers Cooperative Extension website. One is a paper and pencil version, which you see on the slide here, where you can fill in the blanks for the assets on the left-hand side and the liabilities on the right-hand side. And notice that there's different categories of assets, cash assets, real estate, investments, personal property, and then different categories of liabilities or debts as well. And if you prefer to use a computer, as I do for my net worth statement, I use the Excel template from the Rutgers website, and you just download it to your computer and you do all the calculations on your own computer. And it's very easy to update from year to year. So there's two tools that are available, and I'm sure there's many, many more that you can find that will give you the tools to do the net worth calculation. One thing I will point out is that if you own any U.S. savings bonds, as part of your net worth calculation, you'll want to know what the value of those bonds are. And an easy way to do that is to go to treasurydirect.gov, and there is a page where you can go to the savings bond calculator. And as you can see on the slide there, you'll identify the type of bond that it is, whether it's a double E bond or what's become very popular late, the inflation indexed I bond. So that's the series of the bond. And then you'll also fill in the denomination, the serial number, which you'll get right from the front of the bond, and the issue date, which is also on the front of the bond. And from there, you can keep adding if you've got multiple bonds, and it will give you a total of the value of your bonds on the day that you do that calculation. So that's really helpful to know what the value of those bonds are, because you can buy savings bonds and hold them for up to 30 years. They pay interest for up to 30 years. So you'll want to do this periodically to kind of know what their current value is. So I happen to own 12 different I bonds that I purchased during the 2000s decade. And I was very pleasantly surprised to see this summer when I did the calculation that my rate of return in many cases on most of those bonds was double digits. It was actually higher than the current 9.62% that was in effect in July when I did this. And it had to do with the fact that when I bought the bonds, there was also some fixed rate percentage as well as the inflation percentage. And that carries through for the remainder of the lifetime of my bonds. So I have another decade to go on those bonds, and they were earning a very attractive interest rate. So it will tell you not only the value of your bonds, but it also will tell you the current interest rate that you're earning on those bonds when you do the calculation. So again, once you get the number from the Treasury Direct, you can plug that right into your net worth statement if you have bonds as part of your assets. Okay, the third thing, so we've talked about simplifying and downsizing and net worth. The third thing that you can do to have a good ending is to simply have emergency contact cards, because you never know what the ending is going to be. Unfortunately, for some people, it's a car accident, fatalities are involved. So it's really just good to have emergency contact information in several different places in case it's necessary in a time of crisis. So typically what you'll have on these cards will be a person's name and address, their phone number, perhaps an email, although phone number is probably more key to find a family member who might live at home with somebody. And then also emergency contacts. You'll want to list them with their name and their contact information. And you can get these emergency contact cards in lots of different places. The American Red Cross has them, county health departments have them, law enforcement agencies have them. And another place, and I think these are available throughout the country, CERT groups, community emergency response teams. They also will have them as part of their programming and outreach. So it's a good idea to have contact cards in several places, because you never know where this information will happen when the emergency will happen. So have it in your wallet, perhaps in the pocket on your cell phone, if you have one of those things that you can attach to your cell phone. I stick business cards in there, but you could also stick the emergency contact cards. They're kind of small, like a business card would be. Put it in your car and maybe on your refrigerator as well, in case there's an emergency where personnel have to come into your home. So you have basically all the locations you could be covered. And then experts recommend that you make a notation on your emergency cards if there are any pets at home, because there have been some really horrendous stories where somebody is injured very badly. Nobody knows who they are for a while. There's no contact information. And if they live alone and there's pets at home, those pets could go for, days maybe without food or water, and that's not good. So just a notation about that would be helpful as well. These are just some examples of emergency contact cards. These are the ones from the Red Cross that you can download from their website and just kind of print them out and fold them and put the information where I mentioned before. And then another thing that you can do, number 4 on my list, is to have a financial notebook. And I say notebook in air quotes because it doesn't necessarily have to be an actual notebook or binder, although it can be. But basically what I'm talking about here is just a one-stop place for your financial information. One place where somebody can go and have all the information that they need if they have to stand in for you, and possibly make some decisions in an official capacity, like a power of attorney person. It could be on a flash drive. Again, if you're computer savvy and your person that your surrogates are computer savvy, you might put it on a flash drive, or you might even store it in some kind of cloud server like Box or Dropbox or something like that, Google Drive, whatever works for you. So some of the things that people will typically include in a financial notebook would be contact information for their financial advisors, information about their insurance policies, the types of policies, the account number, policy number for the insurance, just maybe the insurance agent, contact information for that, financial accounts. So you've got bank accounts and brokerage accounts, retirement savings accounts like 401ks, IRAs, for example, any real estate information, and then of course information about the debts as well. Who is the debt to? Is it a bank loan? Is it a mortgage? Is it credit cards? Just information about that. For example, if somebody has to step in on your behalf, if you've passed, they will have to cancel your credit cards officially. So they'll need to know that those credit cards exist. So again, this information can be very helpful. Vehicles, VIN numbers, that sort of thing. And then the location of any other important papers, whether things are being stored in a safe deposit box at a financial institution, are they being stored at home in some kind of file drawer, or whatever the situation is, people need to know where those important papers are located. So that's the financial notebook in a nutshell. Number 5 on my list of 12 items for a good ending is a digital assets inventory. So digital assets, many of us have hundreds of them. I know I do. And it's basically information that is stored electronically somehow. So maybe it's on your computer. Maybe it's in the cloud somewhere on some kind of server account. But it's all the information that we need to access accounts, whether they're financial accounts, as is often the case, or shopping accounts. Think about online shopping, whether it's Amazon or any other place. You need access information. And this is really a very personal story for me because I happen to observe in real time my husband's family's distress trying to access information online when nobody had any information about the access information. And it was just a very stressful time for the family. And it really encouraged me to create a fact sheet that I'll talk about in just a minute, where people can write down all this information to access digital assets. But typically among those assets are going to be your username, a password, or a PIN, although PINs aren't as common anymore, because they were a little bit more hackable, I think, than other methods. And many people also have, and rightly should, have two-factor authentication. So there may be some challenge questions that need to be answered, or there may be a text that has to be sent to a cell phone number in order to access the account. So all of that is going to need to be recorded. People are going to need to have the whole process from start to finish to be able to access accounts on your behalf. And of course, these are your trusted surrogates. And sometimes it can be difficult or impossible to retrieve this information if somebody is incapacitated or they pass away. I mean, just think about like Bitcoin, for example. If people have cryptocurrency and there's no information written down, it can be really impossible. I mean, maybe these days with some of the exchanges, there may be a way. But years ago, I mean, there were just a whole lot of stories about people who themselves, never mind family members, even they themselves couldn't find the password and didn't have access to their virtual currency. So it's really important to have this information inventoried. And there's a couple ways to do this. Some people will use the worksheet, that's Plan A, and that's the worksheet that I developed after that story that I told you about, observing my husband's family trying to access my deceased brother-in-law's accounts. So there's just a screenshot of one page. It's about a 6-page document where you would fill in the blanks with information about different categories of digital assets. So that's Plan A. Plan B is you may decide to use some kind of password manager program. And there's a lot of them out there. Some examples are shown on the slide: LastPass, 1Password Keeper. And then, of course, what you would do is share that one password that provides access to all of your other digital assets only with your trusted parties, of course. I will say that for both of those plans, Plan A, filling out the worksheet, or Plan B, using a password manager, expect to take pretty much a full afternoon, if not longer, just completing either the worksheet, because you're basically back testing all of your usernames and passwords and kind of practicing them to make sure that, testing them, if you will, to make sure that they work. That's going to take some time. And likewise, if you use the password manager program, you're going to have to get all that information into the manager program. So again, you're going to be testing all your usernames and passwords. So it's not something that you can do very quickly. You're just going to need to allocate the time. And I would recommend doing, a little bit at a time. Don't necessarily do it all at once, but maybe over, a couple weekends, you can get the job done, either Plan A or Plan B. And then the other thing, keep in mind, is that in the last 5 or 6 years or so, many states, most states now have some legislation related to digital assets. So you'll want to check in with your attorney to make sure that there's language that could include a digital executor in your will. Now, very often it may be your executor as well, but sometimes people want to name a particularly tech-savvy family member to handle some of this. It's something that you'll want to discuss with your attorney and with your family members, a digital executor to manage your digital assets. Okay, number 6 on the list is beneficiary and personal representative designations list. So this is a worksheet where you just basically will list all your non-probate pass-through assets. So these are things that are going to go to a named beneficiary, whether it's a beneficiary of a life insurance policy or a 401k plan. And it's a one-stop list for having all of those beneficiaries of those assets, the non-probate assets, and also the personal representatives in your legal documents. Have them all listed in one place, in one document. And this way it makes it very easy to track the beneficiaries and the representatives, to update them as needed. For example, if somebody that you named as your executor passes away first, you'll want to make sure that there's a contingent benefit executor, which is always a good thing to have. And also, perhaps things change over time, and you'll want to just kind of react to life events as they occur and keep your documents current. But again, this is mainly just to go through the whole process of going through all these documents with named beneficiaries, making sure that they're still current and have all this information listed in one place. And if you see gaps, like you don't have contingent beneficiaries, or maybe your contingent beneficiary has now become your primary and now you need a new contingent, you can identify those gaps. So this will take some time too. You'll be going through your legal documents, or your will, trust, living wills, power of attorney. You'll be reviewing your insurance policies, annuities, IRAs, your employer retirement savings accounts, and any other documents that have either a payable on death arrangement. Savings bonds, for example, often have that. So you'll be going through all of those and putting that information in the one-page document. And again, you can download it from Rutgers Cooperative Extension's website, and you can see a screenshot of what it looks like. Again, it's several pages long, and you just fill in the blanks. Okay, number 7 on the list is untitled property planning. So again, the important thing to remember with untitled property, this is things that don't have a title to it. So it's not your bank accounts, it's not investments, it's not anything that has a beneficiary. It's basically your stuff, all your personal property. It can be a sensitive issue because very often people only own one of something. So if you have several people who want the same thing, that can be a little touchy. So recognize that there could be some sensitivity there. A big issue in many families is fairness. If you only have one of an item, if you give that item to somebody, what do you give to somebody else? Considering the interests of family members and friends as to who might be most interested in items that you own. Many people will make a written list of their stuff and who they want it to go to. And then, of course, like everything else that I've been mentioning, it's important to share this information with your trusted loved ones and your executor. Some people will also consider lifetime gifting, so they get to see their property being enjoyed by another person as much as they enjoyed it themselves. So there's different distribution options. There's no one perfect method. Some people will make a list of designated recipients, and they'll have that list referred to in a will or referred to in a letter of last instructions. Some people will label items. Prize drawings and raffles may occur. Again, if you only have one of an item that several people want and you want to make the process fair. Family consensus and trade-offs, you get this, I'll get that type of philosophy. And again, lifetime gifting, some people will not only share the item, but also share the stories and the history behind an item. And that can be really powerful in passing down family stories from one generation to another. This is an example of a document that you could use. It was developed by a law firm here in Ocala, Florida, where I live. And it's very simple. You could create it yourself. You just basically would write down the name of the beneficiary, who's going to get the item, description of the item, and the location of the item. As the attorney mentioned in a class that I attended, that you use this for tangible personal property. You can do it handwritten, or you can do it on a computer. You want to clearly identify the piece of property. If there's serial numbers, sometimes that's not a bad idea to have, or anything else, colors, anything that can identify it. And of course, where it's located is important. Sign it, date it, initial it. If there's any changes, keep it with the will or letter of last instructions, and then keep it updated, because maybe something will break or get sold or something, and it's no longer going to be on the list because it's not available anymore. And a good resource for untitled personal property, as many of you are probably aware of, is the University of Minnesota program, Who Gets Grandma's Yellow Pie Plate. And there's a really good video that goes with that program, as well as the workbook that could be used as a resource for classes that teach this topic, or just refer people to it for further information. Okay, I mentioned before a letter of last instruction. This is literally as it sounds. It's a letter, it's a document that you create. It's not a legal document, it's not legally binding, but it can be very useful because what you're doing is you're providing your heirs and your trusted surrogates with valuable information that they can use to settle your estate or to handle your financial affairs, whatever the situation might be. So, what I did personally is come up with a task list for my husband. I call it the who to contact and what to do list. And it's just kind of a list of things that I know need to be done if I should pass away first. So, some of the things that somebody might put on this letter of last instructions to include in it would be maybe their preferences for a funeral or a memorial service. You know, do they want to be cremated? Would they prefer to be buried in a casket? Do they know where? All of those preferences would be important to know. Obituary content, I'll get to that a little bit later, including tribute bequests. You know, for example, if you want to have money sent to, well, let's just say AFCPE. In lieu of flowers, a donation could be made to AFCPE, and you'd have to provide contact information for AFCPE for somebody to be able to do that. And who gets the obituary. So make a list of where it should be sent, you know, what newspapers or what organizations. If there's any prepaid funeral services, people need to know about that. And who needs to be notified when you pass away. And others that need to be notified. For example, in my situation, I put on my list Social Security, OPM, which administers my federal pension, credit cards that need to be canceled upon my death, and my final employer. And also, my husband has to know that some of our bills are connected to those credit cards, like the Netflix and the internet. So it can be pretty detailed when you think about how much of our lives is done automatic transfers and everything. Well, those things have to stop when somebody passes away. The location of different accounts in the safe deposit box. And then again, going back to the untitled personal property, who gets your stuff? So all of those pieces of information can be in your letter of last instruction. And there are some templates out there if you Google that online. This is one that I like from Cooperative Extension. It's from University of Idaho, and you can see a screenshot of some of the pages from that particular worksheet. So there's an introductory page, and then there's pages for all the different items that you might include in a letter of last instruction. I mentioned writing your own obituary, and I personally have done this. Obviously, it's not complete, maybe, I don't know, 95% complete. But you get to choose what people say about you. And I was writing about this in my book, Flipping a Switch, and I thought, well, you know, I should really walk my talk. So I decided to do it. And you get to choose what's said about you. And it's also one less thing for your heirs to do at a time of stress. Because, you know, I did have to do that for my mom. And, um, you know, it's just one more thing. And you just hope that you're saying all the things that she would have liked to have had said. But it's the one thing my mother didn't write down. She wrote a whole lot of everything else down, but that one did fall upon me. Some people may want to have two versions, a short obituary that you use for newspapers because you're usually limited in space that you have, and then something longer for maybe a tribute website or for social media, where, you know, length is not necessarily so much of an issue. And then, of course, you'll want to save it electronically, save it, share it with your family and your trusted loved ones. And just like the letter of last instruction, there are many templates online for writing your own obituary as well. So here's just a few that are shown. Not that you have to be confined to these particular sections, but if people are kind of at a loss for how to get started, it will give you some information to start writing that out. And then, of course, you can always embellish it yourself. Pre-planned and prepaid funeral. This is something that somebody might want to consider. So what you're basically doing is paying a funeral home or a company now for services that you anticipate receiving in the future. And there's an option around it, which I'll talk about Plan B in a little bit, but this would be Plan A, where you would pre-plan everything. And you get to choose all the details, the cost, and every other detail that you want to have pre-planned. You can pre-plan the music that is sung at your funeral, although many people will put that in the letter of last instructions. But again, if you're working with a funeral home, they often oversee these arrangements too, so there can be some overlap. You get to choose those details. And I got to say, my mother did that. She had a great financial notebook. All the information was readily available, and she also had a pre-planned and prepaid funeral. And as somebody who lived in New Jersey when she died in Florida, it was very helpful. Literally, the only decision my brother and I had to make was to choose the casket from among the price tier that she had prepaid. And we just took one look at what was available. My mother's favorite color was green. We both pointed to the green one, and it was that easy peasy. It's one less thing to do for your heirs at a time of stress. However, having said that, I would just say read the fine print carefully. The biggest concern that I hear from people here in Florida, where many people do go in later life, is what if I don't die in Florida? And many people have told me that, they don't plan to live here the rest of their life. They came down here to please their spouse. And if he or she should die first, they're out of here and they're going back home to where they came from. So a big concern is not dying where you made the funeral arrangements. So you need to know that that will be covered in the contract. And if not, there is a plan B, and that's literally to just put everything in your letter of last instructions for all your funeral and memorial details, and then have a payable on death account for those final expenses that would be available to your loved ones. There is a good resource from the FTC about funeral arrangements. So if you need something to refer people to, you might want to check that out. Number 11 on the list is lifetime gifts and philanthropy. So you can see some of the advantages of doing that on the slide there. You decrease your taxable estate value, which can be good for estate taxes. You can reduce the size of your probate estate, which will therefore reduce the administrative costs because they're based on a percentage of the estate value. Helps with your downsizing, whether it's stuff or financial assets. As I mentioned before, you can watch gift recipients use and enjoy your gifts. If you give money to a charity, for example, the charity will do something with that money and you'll be able to see your money in action. And of course, you can also help reduce your income taxes if you use strategies like donor advised funds, qualified charitable distributions, and the like. So this year in 2022, you can give any individual up to $16,000 per year this year. And the estate tax exclusion is 12.06 million for the estate. But keep in mind that that is scheduled to go down after 2025 if the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is left to sunset. Okay, and then the last of the 12 strategies for a good ending is communication with surrogates and heirs. It's usually best if you're going to be giving some money to charity to tell family members. This way there's no surprises, no disgruntled heirs, because sometimes family members will assume that all of your assets will go to them, and it's best to let them know that, no, I have some philanthropic intentions as well. Again, depends on your family, but openness is usually the best policy, transparency, if you will. And making sure your family members and your surrogates know what you want, and I've talked about that several times. Making sure your family members and surrogates know the location of your documents and information. Again, a repeat. And then finally, the last thing is using I messages when you describe feelings or beliefs. This can keep the conversation positive and focused. And instead of, talking about the other person, you're just sharing your feelings and your beliefs. So here's an example. There's a template from goodtherapy.org that says if you want to write an I statement, you say, I feel because when what I need is. So here's an example as applied to later life planning. I am or I feel worried when I think about the end of my life because it scares me. What I need is to know that you will carry out my wishes not to have a feeding tube or artificial life support. That would be an example of an I statement. Okay, so I'm just about ready to wrap up. We're almost at the 50-minute mark. Just want to say that at the end of the program that I did for older adults, I ended with this slide. I'm a Jersey girl, so we like our Jersey diners in Jersey, and some of them are old and classic, and some of them are very new and modern looking, and they all have very big menus. And this presentation is very much like a diner menu in Jersey. I gave you a lot of information to think about, and you can't possibly act on everything at once, just like you couldn't eat everything on the Jersey Diner menu all at once. So I just encouraged my class to pick the strategies that work for them, start small, work on one strategy at a time. So when I completed this class, the organization that I teach for, Master of the Possibilities, does have an online evaluation. And unfortunately, with online evaluations, you don't always get the full class response. So even though I had about 20 people in the class, only 5 of them completed the online evaluation. But obviously, I was very pleased with the results, and kind of got a perfect score, which was really nice. And also got some positive comments, which always makes you feel good when you're in financial education. But one thing I did do, because I know that online evals are a problem, is I gave out index cards at the end of the class. And I asked the class members to write down for me on the index card one thing they plan to do as a result of taking this class and getting the information that they did. So as you can see, I had control over that process, and people were able to answer in their own words. Several of them were going to do the digital assets inventory, separate writing lists, filling out the worksheet that was distributed, making a list of who their heirlooms would go to, doing the financial notebook. We had talked in that class about legacy books that adult children can buy for their parents, where they get a series of questions and it gets bound in a book, like Storyworth is an example of that. So somebody was going to do that, completing their obituary and using the website. So you can see that the information was going to be acted upon. And that clearly is what we all look for as financial educators, to do that. So I guess I'm kind of out of time. I'd like to thank you for the gift of your time, taking the time to watch this virtual presentation. Again, if you want the full slide deck, you can go to my SlideShare account and download it. If you have any questions about the class, feel free to reach out to me on email or DM me on Twitter, and I'll be able to answer any questions. So again, thank you very much for attending.